who will now introduce themselves, starting with
The proceeding will start.
who will now introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Dudley.
Hello there, my name is Joseph Dudley. I am Director and Co-founder of Space Skills Alliance. We are a think tank, consultancy and backbone organisation addressing the UK's space skills shortage. We set up in 2019 and we focus on doing research about the space workforce and skills gaps. So we've conducted surveys such as the Space Census in 2020 and again this year, the Space Sector Skills Survey on behalf of the UK Space Agency and DCIT, analysis of job adverts. We're working on a project, an EU Horizon project looking at skills across Europe, pay, diversity, all different aspects of the workforce. We also provide advice to employers, training providers, central government, regional space clusters and so on, and provide a number of tools.
What we're looking for is just who you are and the organisation you represent, and then we'll get into some of the other issues. Mr. McGuinness.
Gordon McGuinness. I'm a Director with Skills Development Scotland.
Good afternoon, Stuart McDowell, Head of Innovation in STEM at City of Glasgow College.
Hello, Jenny Doonan, Head of Projects at Fife College.
I'm Stephen Breslin, Chief Executive of Glasgow Science Centre.
Excellent. Thank you all of us. Sorry to rush you through, but it's important we get to some of the members of Parliament. And we'll start with Sally Ann Hart. Sally Ann.
Thank you, Chairman. So I don't represent a constituency in Scotland. My constituency is Hastings and Rye, and we do have some fantastic vacuum engineering and precision engineering type businesses that are supply chain for our space sector. And one of the issues they raise with me down there, so this is let alone what you're trying to do up in Scotland, is the lack of skills and the lack of young people going into that sort of business. So it is about the Scottish and UK government, so as well as businesses. So how do you think the Scottish Government and the UK Government, what can they do to improve the visibility of the space sector and encourage young people to go into it? And secondly, what should businesses be doing to encourage young people to go into the space sector? So who shall I start with? Who wants to take it first? Jenny Doonan.
Okay.
You look as if you're willing to answer.
So we actually were touching on this a little bit outside. I think the first thing is space is cool, but a lot of that is associated with astronauts and human spaceflight, which, with the best will in the world, does not necessarily feel attainable to your average person. Yet our lives are touched by space all the time. So for me, I think one of the key things would be to communicate more clearly how space affects everyone's life, how to highlight to people young and old, in fact, what happens in their community or their region that is linked to space, so that it is a little bit more attainable, that it feels something that is aspirational but not so far away that they can't access it. I think as a sector, there's a perception that you need a PhD. You don't. There's lots of diverse entry routes. It doesn't all need to be engineering. There's opportunities if you want to work in marketing or HR. And I think showing, yes, there's a fantastic project at Edinburgh University that use space data in a creative way and use that to create art. So, literally anything can be linked to the space sector, and I think it's about showing people that it impacts their daily life and that they can be part of that.
Thank you. Mr. Breslin.
Well, I can speak on behalf of the Glasgow Science Centre. Just the briefest of introductions to the Science Centre. The Science Centre is a bit like the Science Museum, but different in scale. Our role is to inspire young people to develop an interest in science and technology across a wide number of themes. And there's a joke about science centres and science museums. If you want to bring in the crowds, do dinosaurs in space. And both of them work. But as Jenny said, the space engagement has been bringing an astronaut, bringing a spacesuit or a bit of a meteorite, and people get very excited about it, and young people get very excited about it, but they can't see anything beyond that. They can't relate it to careers that they could do. And we have done a lot of engagement with young people over the past few years, specifically on space. And one of the strongest things that comes through in an evaluation is surprise. Surprise in young people that there are actually career opportunities available to them locally and not They don't have to go to Houston to get a career in space. And that goes right throughout, the young person's support system. So no awareness with parents, no awareness with teachers, and even senior leaders within local authority education departments are unaware of what's going on. So the approach that we take is very much centred on the young person, and it's sustained engagement. So we'll bring the astronauts in, and we'll do the big exciting day, but beyond that, we'll be delivering programmes in schools across all of Scotland over a sustained period of time. So we're talking 4 to 10 weeks. And as well as focusing on the young person, we're upskilling the teachers, and we're creating material that the kids can take home, for family learning and their parents, and we're also doing the public events. It's critically important that the positive messages that we give to those young people are reinforced by teachers, reinforced by their parents, and reinforced in the community. So you've got to develop the whole ecosystem.
I'm just going to cut you off there, Sally, because I'm just conscious to let other colleagues in before they go to 3:30, if that's all.
Very quickly,
yes.
Are the businesses involved in this outreach? Yeah.
Absolutely. We've got to bring the real world context in, and that requires industry involvement.
Great, thank you.
Thank you.
Alan Britton.
Thanks, Chair. This question's aimed at Gordon McGuinness and Joseph Dudley, so I'll start with yourself, Gordon. So as part of this inquiry, we've heard evidence from some companies that believe where there's foreign direct investment getting made, it doesn't necessarily create new jobs, but actually a bit of internal displacement, and therefore still left with a skills shortage. So it's just to ask, what's your view on that, and how does Skills Development Scotland, in your case, actually link all that together?
Yeah, it's a good question. And today we've had the bad news in terms of the Mangata development at Prestwick. And that was probably exceptional because of the scale of it. I think the majority of immigrant investing companies tend to be smaller. So I think in the short term there can be displacement before the actual market kind of stabilises again and new talent comes in and is growing. We work with Scottish Development International as part of Team Scotland. We're the kind of key lead in terms of the contact. So we would always encourage companies to be looking long term in terms of their planning. We strike partnership working arrangements with the local colleges, and in the case of Mangata we've been doing an awful lot of work with Ayrshire College for them. So we're conscious of that, and I think I was speaking with Hina at Space Scotland, there needs to be more collaboration at a sector level to try and minimise that level of what's been seen as poaching in the past. And we've seen incidents where wages have been offered and attracted people from other companies which are too high and unsustainable. So we'd always be there to provide an advisory role in that type of situation. And I think the other key thing for us is to make as much connections to the partnership working that we can do with both universities and colleges. I think we were having a discussion earlier on, and I think the colleges are often bypassed by some of these companies because the default is always to look at graduates, and that's not the case. They need to be a bit more imaginative in their workforce planning.
I know it's maybe difficult to comment on Mangata given today's announcement, but do we think they've maybe overpromised, with what they can deliver? Is there enough due diligence?
I get the news about 12 o'clock today, so I don't have any of the background. It's one of my team that's been acting as part of the kind of Team Scotland approach. I wouldn't like to comment at this stage, I'm afraid.
Okay, thanks. Okay. Can I ask that to yourself, to Joseph Dudley, but also in terms of that relating to foreign direct investment, Space Scotland suggested that actually, for foreign direct investment and any support given, that support should be linked to actual confirmation of new jobs being created. Is that a realistic prospect to manage?
I think it's difficult often for companies to know exactly what their skills needs are going to be and how many jobs they're going to be able to create, depending on the details. As we have seen today, a lot of those details don't get finalised until the last minute, and so at the time that companies are choosing to invest, they've got a kind of rough idea of what they might need, and then that may change further down the line. What we can do is we can, produce some rough estimates and some scenarios, but we're never 100% sure on this. And when we start attaching conditions to that investment, it can often kind of scare companies away because they go, well, we're not certain that we can do this, and therefore we don't want to fully commit.
Thank you. Christine Jarton.
Sort of follows on from that. But one of the things that we came across in a recent trip to California is the creation of a kind of ecosystem, an environment where people understand the jobs that are available, and there's a kind of critical mass that we need to reach. So to what extent do you think the space industry is still competing with others, and that we haven't done enough, or what can we do to create the sort of environment which persuades young people, either going to college or university, that the environment is right and it's there, and that they don't go off and do something else?
Yeah, I think certainly for Glasgow City region, I think part of the challenge that you may have is the way that space sector's competing with other sectors, and rather large sectors for the city region. You've got around 50,000 businesses, 800,000 roles, things like advanced manufacturing, life sciences, which are key sectors for Scotland as well. So I think space isn't the only sector that's crying out for new talent, and nor is it the only sector that's trying to promote itself. But I think one of the things, based on both questions actually around youth, is actually the current workforce, and where are there opportunities to look at transitions from sectors currently into the space sector, perhaps in the shorter term, because perhaps even as young people start to move through the education system, it's still going to be a number of years before they're, if you like, industry ready. And what we do have across Scotland is a very talented workforce, and some that are perhaps being displaced from other sectors. So as much as I acknowledge the importance of youth and the importance of new talent, perhaps existing workforce could be part of the solution to try and stimulate the workforce in the space sector.
The awareness, as has been mentioned already, of the fact that it's not just people with degrees in aeronautical science that you're looking for, it's people who can be HR specialists, who can read the data, who can do all of that we need to persuade people in other... How do we go about moving people from other industries, though? Is that just all about awareness?
I think there's perhaps two aspects to that. The first of which is there is the Partnership Action for Continuous Employment. So any member of the workforce who might be at risk of displacement, there are mechanisms in place to promote other routes of employment. So there is the sort of formal route, but another really strong initiative in Scotland is the STEM Ambassadors Programme, where we've got fantastic role models right across the spectrum of STEM areas. Again, I don't know how many of those ambassadors represent the space sector, but again, there are mechanisms in place, perhaps to pick up on Gordon's point around that collaborative approach. There are levers at play through recognised programmes that perhaps the space sector could jump on the back of.
Thank you.
Thank you. Michael Shanks.
Thanks very much. Following on from a number of the questions, I suppose, around young people, but I'll maybe come back, Stuart, to your point about retraining as well, because I think that is really important. I was a teacher before I was elected, and careers advice in schools, I think, could definitely be improved. It's probably the understatement of the century. But also particularly thinking about how we encourage young people to think of careers that don't necessarily involve going to university as the only outcome from school, because it does feel a bit like that's the only output we're looking for from schools. So from your point of view, Stuart and Jenny, I suppose, in the college sector, what more can government do to support the college sector to actually be that kind of viable alternative rather than just what it sometimes is seen as, which is a bit of a backstop? And I know that that's not true, but I think that's sometimes how it's portrayed.
I think one of the big gaps right now is if we've got great STEM outreach, but for that young person that is engaged by the space sector, irrespective of engineering or not, unless they want to go to university, there's nowhere for them to go because there's no progression pathway. So I think one of the key things is to work with colleges and say, right, what would be the step for that young person to come into college foundation apprenticeships, for example, that a young person actually attends college while they're still in school. They build that kind of foundational understanding of a job role in a sector. It helps to get them inspired while they're still quite young. They're in that kind of protected school bubble, and then they can make choices to come on into college, do engineering courses, data science courses, etc. I think the importance of a credible job opportunity at the other end cannot be underestimated, though. We've certainly had experiences where we've put forward what we think to be great courses and really interesting things, don't necessarily get the uptake. The minute we say, oh, there's an employer involved, boom, we get the recruitment. So I think to the earlier point about the involvement of business, I think key with the colleges is building that ecosystem that's grown up around the universities and obviously heavily linked to kind of research and technology development, to get that to come towards the colleges to say, look, we have value add here in terms of retraining, but in apprenticeships, in bringing that diversity of person into the sector. Obviously there's a kind of gender diversity, but also we've got about 20% of our students that cite a disability, for example. We've got about 40% of students who have caring responsibilities, diverse, different needs, different kind of profile, and they are able to access a career in the space sector where, put bluntly, 4 years in uni isn't really an option for them. So I think being able to show that progression pathway, the diversity of access to education, night classes, part-time, that would be a huge support to the sector and to colleges.
If I might comment on that as well. One of the particular issues within the space sector is it has a very, very large number of people with degrees, about 85%. The number of people with vocational qualifications is much smaller, and a lot of those do a vocational qualification and then go on to do a degree. Only about a third of companies in the space sector across the UK engage with, have apprentices on board at the moment, and that's particularly the larger companies. So there's clearly still a lot of room to bring in more apprentices and really build the, I think we were talking earlier about the kind of relative esteem of the two pathways, that apprenticeships are kind of unfairly, I think, looked on as not as good as degrees, when actually they add a huge amount of value and get people into the workforce earlier, which means they're getting those skills earlier and really building up their experience.
Can I maybe just push, Stuart, I know you want to come in as well, but just more on the, colleges have disproportionately felt the brunt of cuts from government for quite a long time, and universities have benefited in some ways from that Scottish Funding Council model. So what more can government do to be part of the solution in the college sector to drive this forward?
I think probably the key word's flexibility. I mean, City of Glasgow College for a number of years has diversified its revenue to be less reliant on government funding, a large portfolio of commercial work, international work. But even some recent projects, I think, can again make sure that colleges are playing their role in supporting industry whilst also offering opportunities. So Jenny and I are currently working on a UK Space Agency project creating micro-credentials for the space sector, predominantly looking at these people that are perhaps looking to transition from one sector to the other. Also, the 6 regional colleges in Glasgow have recently secured 1.2 million from Innovate UK to support business innovation, again across key sectors. The sectors relevant to space would be advanced manufacturing, digital enablement. So I think it's about encouraging entrepreneurship. I mean, we talk about creating an entrepreneurial mindset in our students, but I think endorsing entrepreneurship within the college sector to do things slightly different, not be afraid to be innovative and entrepreneurial. And again, I think that's where, certainly for us as an institution, you can't ignore the current situation, but what you can do is show that you're resilient, you're adaptable, and look elsewhere, whether that would be at a Scottish level or UK level. And I guess the final point I would make on that is a lot of these funds are really driven by business need, which is exactly where the colleges want to be playing. So it's not delivering education for education's sake, it's delivering an economic and a social value for the key industries.
I think something just to add to that, there's quite a lot of technology funding. Innovate UK, for example, dedicated skills funding out with kind of core models is less available. So something to maybe consider is are there models of putting out technology funding where you say, and 5% or 10% of a project budget is going to be working with regional partners, wherever that project is, to develop those training needs, be that an online course, a face-to-face course, etc. There's been some good opportunities from the UK Space Agency recently in terms of skills funding, but the most recent one, there were 100 companies on the webinar that announced against where there's going to be 6 projects selected. So it just goes to show the level of competitiveness. And I think, being candid, if the companies in there are, you know, the University of Edinburgh or Glasgow or Cambridge or Oxford, in the best will in the world, you know, colleges might not necessarily get that allocation. Like, there's a diverse kind of eligibility there, but I think support to say that, you know, colleges, that parity of esteem, and that we can offer something in this space would certainly be welcomed.
I think Mr McGuinness wanted to come into that.
So I draw parallels. I worked with the National Shipbuilding Office when we were doing the UK shipbuilding skills strategy. So if you look at companies north and south of the border, the apprenticeship levy and how it's implemented is much more generous south of the border than it is. So there's an issue there that I think would bring more resource to colleges and to training providers if that was more equitable, and understand there's underspends at a UK level. And I think the other thing I would point to as well is some funding at UK level or England for boot camps, which enables cross-training and upskilling for people who are unemployed or looking to career change. And employers can also tap into that and train some of their own staff at a discounted rate. So there's probably 2 funding streams that would put Scotland in a better playing field.
One last question from Sally Ann before...
Yes, very quickly, and it's good to hear there's some employability-led education, so you get your education pathways leading to your employment pathways. But just after the Cornish launch of the rocket, well, it didn't launch, but after, there was the UK Space Agency did a tour, Space for Everyone tour. It stopped at Hastings, it also stopped up in Aberdeenshire, in Aberdeen. So Scotland's soon to achieve its end-to-end capability with the first UK orbital launch. Is there something that the UK Space Agency can do that's similar to the Space for Everyone tour that can be done in order to really tweak people's imaginations? Yeah.
Can I come in there? There are hundreds of initiatives like the Space on Tour for every sector. There always has been. And I feel we have to go further than these single interventions. If we really want to see the transformation in our young people's focus and interests that all of these sectors require, we've got to engage them over a period of time in a sustained manner rather than just one-off events that happen all over the country. So we have been awarded a significant amount of money. It's £95,000 from the UK Space Agency to be spent over 1 year to create engagement programmes for Scotland. And we will build a STEM learning pathway, which is a 4 to 10 week module that schools and classes will sign up for. It's fully curriculum linked, and it will involve industry experts, industry and academic experts, to bring real world context to it. But it's sustained, it's progressive, and we're rolling it out across all of Scotland. And then an event like a Saxiford launch will become a highlight of that programme. But there will be preparation in advance, during and after. And I really believe that if we want to get in that transformation, we have got to engage with young people on a sustained basis over a number of weeks, over a number of years, to really increase the pool of talent that is either going to go into an apprenticeship, a college or university pathway.
And you mentioned that tour in particular. I think actually it's an example of how in some ways not to do this kind of outreach. And the reason I say that is it was taking a model of a rocket around the country along with a number of outreach volunteers dressed as astronauts, emphasizing the 2 parts of the space sector that everybody already knows about. And while they are the most engaging for the public, what they miss is actually the whole rest of the sector, where those skills gaps are. There is no shortage of applicants for becoming an astronaut. There are huge shortages of applicants for pretty much every other role in the sector. And so when we are doing these sorts of outreach activities, I completely agree with Steve that it needs to be sustained, and it also needs to be focusing on those careers where there are gaps.
It was one of the things that we've heard quite profoundly in our written evidence, and those that have come to this committee, is the skills gap, the tail of the sector, which business skills, promotional skills, HR. Is that a real issue for you guys? Is that what you're finding in your own experience? And before you answer, I'm just going to have to say that we're now moving into an informal session. There'll no longer be any broadcast, but we are still committed to listening to you guys, hearing your evidence, and it will be included in our final report as an informal discussion. So I'm really sorry about this, guys. It's just been one of these days in Westminster today. But what you lack in quantity.
The proceeding is currently suspended. 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 The proceeding.
Welcome back to the Scottish Affairs Committee, where we are listening from Education and Skills in the Scottish Space Sector. Douglas Ross.
Mr Breslin, we've heard that there are one-off events to attract younger people into science, technology, the space sector, and there is investment into longer-term programmes. Is there a role for both, or should we be prioritising one over the other now?
I think we need to move to those longer-term programmes, but the one-off events can fit within those longer-term programmes. And what the longer-term programmes give is they add context to those events, so you get much more impact from the single event. Now, the point I'd like to make is that we have to sustain this. It takes a lot of effort to get these programmes up and running, and we're now in our third year working with the energy industry to deliver a programme on net zero. And through that programme, we have engaged with 74,000 young people across 30 of the 32 local authority areas of Scotland. And for each of those young people, that's about 16 hours of engagement time. So that's a lot of engagement. But it took us a long time to get there. And with it, we're about to do something similar for the space, with the Space Agency funding. Most of the initial effort will be getting sign-up from schools and teachers and getting them to commit to the programme. Right now, we've got a hard stop date of March of next year for that programme. So we don't want to fall off a cliff. So if you want to see the kind of impact at scale that we've delivered for the energy industry, then we have to have a long-term thinking about what are the big projects we're going to fund, over what period are we going to fund them, so that if we're building expectation, we can deliver year in for those young people in schools.
Okay, thank you. The other thing I wanted to follow up, I think it was when we were last in the public session, but apologies if not. Mr McGuinness, again, you seem to get approval from your fellow panellists when you were speaking about the apprenticeship levy perhaps not working as well as it could in Scotland, and it has been more successful south of the border. Is that, no?
There is differences. Yes. So Scotland has maintained the programme of funding through apprenticeships and through colleges. England created a model of the apprenticeship levy, so employers of a specific size can draw down levy funding. Now, what's awarded in England in the financial value is of a higher level than it is in Scotland, but apprenticeship numbers have actually fallen in England. Now, there'll be a variety of reasons for that, not just funding for the pandemic and everything else. We've worked very hard, particularly in the higher value manufacturing, to maintain investment in recruitment levels. Probably about 1,600, 1,800 new starts last year within engineering related skills.
So are you happy with the apprenticeship levy in Scotland in its current form? Or do you think there could be improvements, learning from elsewhere, not just taking the English model, but looking at where some elements have been successful and have some change in Scotland? Or are you comfortable that it provides what businesses need and what the apprentices need?
I think for employers who are working cross-border, the feedback from them is the financial difference definitely makes a difference. That disparity makes a difference. We've had some examples of companies taking their training south because it's more lucrative if they're delivering that in-house. So I think our apprenticeship funding in Scotland has not increased in levels probably in about 10 years. So when you take into account inflation, so that's not just for people at colleges, it's for private providers and charities as well. I think there could probably be a review of funding levels, and that would need some additional increase in overall funding into the apprenticeship system.
That with the approval of others. It's certainly the reason I ask is because this is something I raise quite a lot, and every organisation or group of various different sectors I speak to want to see some change, but there seems to be a reluctance. You know, and a lot of people are speaking about improvements, some of them quite minor, that could be made to the apprenticeship levy in Scotland. But for whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be a political will to do that. And I just wonder why. Are we coming up against resistance where there shouldn't be? Because everyone wants it to be successful. And if there are reasons why it's not being successful, and that example, Mr McGuinness, of businesses actually taking their training down south is quite concerning. And I wonder why we're not addressing these issues.
Yeah, I'd make 2 points. When the levy was introduced at first by the UK government, there was no consultation with the devolved nations. So when the actual allocations were made through Barnett, and because the levy also applies to the public sector, the Scottish Government took the view that there was actually a negative effect in the overall Scottish budget, because people like Glasgow Health Board, for example, with their high number of staff, I think their levy, apprenticeship levy was in the region of £6 million. So there's no way that they could directly recover it. Okay, so that was one point. The next point, we're obviously in the middle of a skills review just now of the skills system. The Minister has indicated a desire to move to a single funding agency, so to put the Scottish Funding Council and the parts from SDS. So I would hope, and there's been a lot of statements around parity of esteem, that within that new structure and new funding agency there will be a fairer distribution of the finance for work-based qualifications.
Mr Dudley, can I come to you? You were saying how you were set up in 2019. What was the impetus to set up back in 2019 with this type of think tank approach? Did you see a gap there that had to be filled? Had it existed for a while? And I noticed about 18 months ago you had your 5 solutions to the space skills gap. Can you tell us how much progress or otherwise has been made against your 5 kind of key areas that you thought could improve its skills pipeline for the space sector?
Oh, so, yes, we set up in 2019 to address the problems, the gaps that we could see, particularly around data. So prior to that, I set up a website called spacecareers.uk, which is exactly what you think it is. And that has, a jobs board, and it has profiles of people in the space sector and so on. And one of the issues that we were running into was we said, well, we don't actually know, how many people are needed in any of these particular areas. There was a lot of talk of there being skills gaps, but no specifics of, skills gaps in what areas, at what seniority levels, in which parts of the UK, and crucially, how we're going to do something about it. And so we set up in order to, first off, improve that understanding, improve that level of data, and I think we've made some significant inroads there. And then also to start thinking about, what might the solutions be and how can we help support them? We're a very small organisation. We don't have the capacity to enact very large-scale changes or to run training ourselves, but we hope that by providing data and resources, that organisations like those represented here today can then say, right, we know how many satellite engineers we need, we know how many people with commercial skills are needed, and now we can go and train those up. So we're really trying to address that gap. And to the second part of your question about our 5 solutions, so they are not intended to be, solving all of the problems or addressing everything, but we thought, what are 5 things, really concrete actions? And I think it was mentioned earlier about some of the strategy documents that have come out from both the UK and Scottish governments. One of the things that we found with those is they were very thin on concrete actions. What can I, as a company, do? What can I, as a training provider, do? And we wanted then to be able to say, well, here are some very specific things. So included on that are things like creating a common language to be able to talk about these skills. So we've created Spacecraft, which is the Space Competencies Framework, and that's based on looking at lots of jobs within the space sector and really trying to understand what are those skills that are needed. And we know that that's being used now in industry. It's being used by some of the universities to build courses around and to think then about skills auditing and so on. And it just allows a little bit more of a join-up. We've also been pushed within those 5 solutions for more accessible training that is also more flexible. So there's been some conversation earlier on this panel about opportunities for continuing professional development throughout your career. And there's been a big focus within the space sector on very traditional paths. So the most common path into the sector is to do a degree, and it's to do a degree in physics or engineering, particularly aerospace engineering. And the number of people who come in from other sectors or come through non-traditional routes is relatively low. And I think there's a lot of opportunities there to bring people in, but we also need training that is flexible, that allows them to do that when they are not in a position that young people are in of only focusing on their training. By this point, they might have a job, a family, and they've got to find a way to do all of that.
I think maybe Wendy wants to come in.
Thank you very much, Douglas. Just on that point then, is part of the challenge then that individuals themselves that might be interested in transferring skills from another industry into space are just not aware of the skill set that's available. When we were in Shetland, one of the members of staff that we spoke to up there had been a refrigeration engineer originally before he'd went to NASA. But are we struggling to actually transferring skills as well?
Definitely. I mean, if you want to become a lawyer, you Google law conversion courses and you will get hundreds of results. There are many established courses. If you want to become a satellite engineer, there are no courses for that transferability. There are some that are currently in development. So we did a piece of work for the UK Space Agency last year, trying to look at skills gaps in the sector. Off the back of that, they have put out a call for funding, a call for bids that they are funding to do with training. And one of the things that they're looking at within that is career changes and how do we make it possible for people to come across from other industries. And there are some large companies who work across industries who are particularly interested in that.
Is that part of the challenge with companies as well then? Sorry, I've come in again. In that they are not necessarily thinking about taking people without being able to tick all the boxes, but realising that they can teach them in the job or they can learn in the job. And that might be the challenge in terms of that need to have a degree at the very first instance. We've got representatives here from further education. There's got to be different pathways that we should be encouraging as well.
Absolutely, and it's something we're really trying to encourage employers to be open to. That actually there are these non-traditional pathways, and by saying, well, we will only accept people who have come through, a physics degree, you're really limiting your options. And so there needs to be that openness by employers to say, we will look at your skills rather than your qualifications, and we will be willing to train you up. I think the hesitation there is particularly a lot of these companies, they want to have somebody who can come in and immediately hit the ground running. They don't always have the time, the luxury of being able to spend some time training somebody up.
And is that where the inward investment can play a part as well, as actually they don't need to because they know that they can potentially pay higher salaries that will get the person with the full skill set without having to go through the
salaries are definitely a big issue. We did a study of salaries in the sector and found that when you compare to similar jobs within the tech sector where there's high demand for the same skills, the space sector is paying less, and that's particularly true in Scotland.
And could I ask then, I think you said in your introductory remarks you're also looking at skills across Europe at the moment as well. How does Scotland compare with other parts of Europe?
It's quite early days on that European project, so I don't have a lot of detail there. But we're seeing quite similar issues across the European space sector as well. And a lot of the same, we're trying to apply the same kind of approaches. So I mentioned about the kind of competencies framework and so on. We're looking at how does that work on more of an EU level. But the UK space sector is very closely integrated with the European space sector. There's a lot of crossover. in terms of people's career paths, that they will spend some time in Europe. I think Jenny was mentioning earlier that she did some of her career in Darmstadt. And we are very closely integrated with the European Space Agency and so on. So, there are very similar problems and opportunities for join up there.
And then if I can come to Mr McDowell and Ms Doonan, you had a joint submission in your evidence, and at point 7, page 5 I think it was, you said the government needs to invest in skills. The sector simply cannot grow without the development of the talent pipeline that enables it. What is your message? We will do a report to UK government, but it also goes to Scottish government. What would your ask be to the two governments to deal with the point you put in here about the government investing in skills?
So I think there's a couple of things. In the Space Industrial Plan, it highlights the importance of accessible and visible pathways into the sector. I think colleges are really uniquely placed to offer that, just with the diversity of model. I think the second thing is there's a specific ambition around the increased adoption of UK space services by government. So I think for me, the government in its procurement and its engagement with the sector should be, as part of that package, requiring those people responding to that procurement notice to work with education partners to ensure that with new technology programmes, new service programmes, that education is bedded in. That has the added benefit of some of the things we've recently been saying around explaining to the public why it's important, showing the diversity of space, data applications, etc. So to me, it's to see it in an integrated way with the broader ambition of the sector to grow and to partner with colleges to do that.
Yeah, I think just to add to that, back to the point that was made around this recognition of what colleges can deliver. I think colleges do have a track record of being able to deliver workforce development and at scale and in various models, not just through apprenticeship frameworks. I think the diversity points are one that's really well made. We do often talk about how do we make sectors more accessible and inclusive, and I think it's important that, for us, our SIMD percentage is about 6% higher than the sector average. Again, we have a large proportion of students that are care experienced, and we often need to try and find a way to be that signpost into sectors that are looking for diversity. I guess another...
Just on that point then, just before you move on, you're doing a good job at that in terms of attracting candidates and students in.
Yes.
Is the industry equipped to support them when they leave college, or are you investing a lot in them and then the industry isn't ready to pick up that mantle, do you think?
I guess that's the responsibility of the colleges. I think colleges do, they have a much more supportive environment for students. Again, a lot of personalised support, a lot of mental health and well-being support. So there is a lot of us, there's a very supportive environment, whereas in university, having been through both, you're very much an independent learner and you drive your own learning. So I think the college's job is to make sure that they are ready. And at City of Glasgow College, we have a new concept around city attributes, and that is that every student that leaves the institution will have particular attributes like resilience and adaptability, that no matter whether they're going into the maritime sector, the construction, creative industries, or the space sector, they are ready for work. So I think that responsibility does sit on the shoulders of colleges. If you don't mind, just one final point, just on what's required is also access to probably infrastructure. So we're very fortunate at our Riverside campus. We've got some of the best maritime simulators, I think, in the UK, an expansive engineering workshop. But certainly Jenny and I have spoke about this before around just access to things like clean rooms and other spaces to allow experimentation, to maybe try and combat that failure where you're creating safe spaces to experiment. And again, that's probably not a huge amount. We certainly don't have any facilities around space. We do hope to have one day. But
I think that ties into a couple of things. I think, in Fife, as part of the work we're doing at the Freeport, we're working with Fife Council, Edinburgh University, National Manufacturing Institute of Scotland. Our ambition is certainly to have an innovation centre on that facility. So that would provide, shared facilities that could apply to the space sector with some maybe additional investment. But I think that then comes back to some of the points about that entrepreneurial mindset, that opportunity to fail. That gives a place for these groups of people interested in this sector and the adjacent sectors to come together, share ideas, and I think that's that's heavily what's driven, the Silicon Valley kind of context before. So certainly, yeah, that kind of shared environment in the Central Belt would be good.
My final question, if I can, Chair, back to Ms Doonan. You were speaking about the proportion of female students that you have. We've heard earlier evidence in our inquiry that the attrition rate, even during the courses with female students, was quite high. The drop-off was quite significant, and then even further, not taking up careers for a variety of reasons. What more can be done to support more female students coming into the science space sector and getting those qualifications, and then keeping them for the end of their training, and then ultimately into a career in those sectors?
I think there's a couple of things. Evidence says that the biggest driver in STEM generally for women, for women and men, is around role modelling. We've touched on that. So I think having more women out talking about space, talking about their careers, and I think we do that quite well. But the reality is, when there aren't so many in the industry, finding them to go out and chat is an issue. I think the second thing is about that retraining and that opportunity to get back into the sector, irrespective of your role, where you're an engineer or you're in maybe one of the more business support functions. It's a heavily tech-driven sector, and you need to maintain your understanding of the sector. And if you choose to take a career break for whatever reason, you might find that your knowledge, doesn't keep up pace. There's a great organisation in Scotland called Equate that has programmes to help women who are in technology roles to do a kind of get back into the workplace after they've had a break, and that gets them back upskilled in that technology space again. So something like that helps keep information current and knowledge current, so they can feel confident back into the workplace, I think would be really helpful.
Perfect spot to bring in. Ms Chamberlain was going to ask some questions about diversity in the workforce in the space sector. Wendy.
Okay, I think I'm going to ask something else, though. If that's
you are? Okay, well, there you go.
Douglas covered it so well. But I just, I'm very conscious, and apologies, I was in the chamber for Home Office questions and then the statement. I probably missed a whole load of things. But I just wanted to ask you, Mr Breslin, in relation to the Science Centre, having visited it with my family, having, I think, once upon a time taken part in some science quiz of an evening there. Yeah. Yes. It's just that wee bit around for me, how do we get away from the mindset of that's not for you? How do you see your role in the Science Centre as actually not just about educating children, but educating families and other stakeholders as well?
It's critically important, and I've seen it with my own eyes. Families coming up to the Science Centre, as you'll know, you can either turn left into our cinema or turn right into the Science Mall, and to paraphrase the chap with this, with his wife and young daughter, said, well, we're not getting into that science stuff because that's not for us. And that's the first time I'd ever seen it with my own eyes. For some people, it's not for them. So we have worked very hard over the past few years just to get groups and families in who are scared of the Science Centre. And some of it is they're scared that they'll feel stupid when they come in, or be made to look stupid because they don't understand it, the parents. And that's the first step, getting over that boundary. So we do a lot of events that have got nothing to do with science. It's just about getting people into the building. And if you can get them over the threshold, then you can start to work with them and develop their confidence before anything else. To the point where they start asking questions and they start developing a curiosity for themselves and maybe their children. But it's critically important, because if we are talking to young people and giving positive messages about all of these different opportunities that are out there, if they go home to a family and are told, forget that, that's not for people like us, then we're wasting our time. So we do, I've said this already in the session, but our focus is very much on the young person. But we create materials to make sure that the messages that we are given to the young person are taken home and discussed within a family context, and we try and facilitate that. And then also work very closely with teachers to raise awareness there, but also critically important is the community. So that the community has awareness of what's going on. I mean, you wouldn't believe how many people are surprised when I'll say to them, you'll know the local area, there are rocket's been built in Cumbernauld. Not many people know that. So that's you've got to make it normal for them and not alien, and try and understand why they're scared or feel it's not for them.
And also that space isn't just about rockets. I think the data aspect
absolutely.
is something that's very little understood, and of course the direct to home, which we're moving away from. I think when you say to people that basically what space has done up until recent times is direct to home, and what that means for you in terms of going home and switching on your television is part of that too. I think you do a great job, but I'm just conscious of how all those different factors and influencers on young people, we actually need to challenge them all. If I can ask a wee bit around recruiting from overseas, and it's probably to yourself, Mr Dudley and then Mr McGuinness, how international is Scotland's space workforce, and is that changing? And there are positives and negatives, I suppose, of all of that.
So we don't have a lot of detail on Scotland's space sector specifically. The best data we have comes from the space census that we ran in 2020, and we're actually running another one right now, when we will be able to get probably some more detailed data. But in that 2020 survey for the whole of the UK, we found that about 18% of the space workforce were foreign nationals. Most of those were Europeans. One of the things that has come up in skills surveys and discussions has actually been the impact of Brexit. As I was mentioning earlier, there is quite a lot of integration between the UK and European space sectors, and so that has been a difficulty. And about a third of companies try to hire from outside of the UK, and that's more common for the larger ones, not least because of the kind of hurdles that they need to overcome. And we've heard quite different things. Some companies say, the visa process is extremely complicated, we're really struggling with it, we don't have the time and the expertise to deal with it. Other companies say actually it was quite straightforward. I'm not quite sure why there's this kind of wide range of experiences, but certainly quite a lot of companies are engaging with it because they are finding that there aren't enough people locally.
And when they're coming, are they coming on a temporary basis, or are they coming for longer than that to make Scotland their home?
I don't know. I don't have the data on that, but I know that DCIT are doing some investigation into those kinds of visas at the moment.
Scottish, so it's something we are going to do a bit further work with the Space Scotland, with the sector body. The Scottish Government just introduced at the end of March a new talent attraction and migration service, so we should start to get more data from that service. It's an initial service just now. It will expand in August, but a service looking to support individuals, and then one that's more focused on companies. And I think for smaller companies, and I've referenced the size of the company base here, then being a sponsor for a visa for that first time can be quite daunting. So this new service is designed to be further supportive around that.
And is that part of also a recognition that you're not just in competition on an international basis, but also on a UK basis as well?
It is. I think companies would be encouraged to minimise from not poaching too much within that UK market. But it's called a labour market for a reason, and people will move if the money is right, and that's where you can see increased churn when skill sets are in demand. So
on money, has there been any concerns raised about the varying income tax bands in Scotland?
It's not featured in the conversation we've had. It'd be one maybe more to address to the space cluster.
Okay, great, thank you. Thank you. And so do you think there's always going to be skill sets, and this to anybody who wants to come in which Scottish space companies are always going to look overseas? Or do you think there will be an opportunity for those core skills to be developed as the sector develops from an education perspective?
As part of our work with the Migration Advisory Service, where they were given concessions in the past, there was an undertaking always given that if concessions were given for specific skill sets, then the home nation had to put a plan in place to start to try and address those, so that it was not going to be something that would sustain over a longer period of time.
And is that working?
It's probably not as well as it should do, but it changes with the markets as well. So technology goes through cycles. So what would be a screaming skill shortage, 5 years ago in areas like tool makers and others are become much more redundant because of digital capabilities now. And
So actually, what I think you're saying is there will always be a need to recruit from overseas, but it won't necessarily be for the same skill sets.
I think so.
There just will always be a need for that mix.
Yeah.
Okay.
I would say also there that there are some very specific skills where perhaps the number of experts across Europe is in the tens. And so it isn't viable to say, well, let's run a course in Scotland or even in the whole of the UK because there's just not enough people. It's not commercially viable. And so in those situations, you have some experts who kind of hop around the place wherever they happen to be needed.
Anything from the colleges you would want to add in relation to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that we've spoke about diversity. I think in its own right, you're going to be attracting talent from overseas in order to create that diversity in the workforce. But equally for our own students to then take their ambitions abroad. And so it's actually that movement that goes both ways. I guess the most important thing is to make sure that colleges are providing as many opportunities to high quality jobs as possible. And I think it comes back to a point that Stephen made around grabbing the attention and the kind of excitement of young people, but making sure that there is a pathway there. And that pathway may well take you to North America, it might take you to Asia, but I think when you look at the stats around graduates coming out of Glasgow City region, you're in the tens of thousands. And when you look at, back to the point you made, Joseph, around quantifying the number of jobs, I think there needs to be perhaps a bit of work done in saying, well, where are the graduates going? So are we experiencing such a gap that we just simply don't have the human resource to fill the jobs? Or is it the graduates that are coming out aren't being signposted to where the economy needs them most, where you then revert to perhaps bringing talent from
overseas,
abroad.
where maybe you didn't need to in the first instance.
Possibly.
Or at least you could provide the grounding on a local basis. Okay, great. And just on the final point then, obviously mentioned a bit of support for those smaller companies for when they are having to recruit from abroad, but is there anything from a government perspective that the committee should be signposting that we would want to do to better support companies to recruit from abroad where there's a need to do that? It sounds like you've, in terms of providing that support to the SMEs, that's there, but is there anything else that you would expect that we should be doing, Mr. Dudley?
I think, some of those small companies struggle with the kind of paperwork, and recently there have been these changes in the income bands related to some of the visas, and we think that has an impact on perhaps 5% of the sector. Which is not inconsiderable when we consider the skill shortage and so on. And I think one of the most important things really is long-term certainty, because bringing someone in on a visa, or indeed hiring at all, is quite a big investment by a company, particularly a small company.
Particularly if they are going to bring a spouse, for example,
and
family.
And so they need to be able to say, this job is confirmed for a certain amount of time, and then that ties into the length of contracts that are given. I know that some of companies in the sector have complained a bit about short-term government contracts and everything being on a kind of one-year timescale, which makes it very hard to plan and say, well, we're going to need this skill in the long term, so let's invest in training or hiring and so on.
Thank you very much.
And just lastly, and I think the session has worked out quite well, and I'm very sorry for all the interruptions again, and thank you for your forbearance. What's not come across in this session is we have a successful space sector, which even when we're in the States, it's acknowledged that there's something particular going on in Scotland that's very positive, and I think it's as well to state that and put that out there when we're having this session. But are you hopeful for the sector, given all the difficulties and challenges and all the issues that we've had in their conversations here today? Do you remain hopeful that we can emerge as one of the key centres for space within Europe, if not just in Europe, but in the world. And I just want to hear what you think about as we go forward. Are you hopeful, or do you think that this is just going to be beyond our ability and our scale to actually be up there?
I might take that first, if that's all right. So I worked in the space industry for 15 years before I moved into education, and to do that I had to leave not Scotland, the whole of the UK. As Joseph said, I went to Germany and I came back to south of England, and I was desperate to get back to Scotland. I couldn't get there because the sector wasn't there where my career was at the time, and eventually I got back up about 8 years ago now, because it was great to see that Clyde Space, as that first space company at the time, had grown to that place where it was a bigger company, it needed different people at different levels. So to now see in the last 8 years what we've achieved in terms of the number of companies, the end-to-end capability, the data, and then all these adjacent sectors that are using space data in other areas, I think it's massively inspirational. And to be sitting here, particularly for colleges, to be saying you can come from any background, go to any school, and we're going to make sure there's a pathway for you so you can work in space, as it were. I think that's fantastic, and I do think we'll achieve it 100%.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunities are really exciting. I think the sector's at a really interesting juncture, perhaps, hence the reason for the inquiry is how does it scale, and how does it scale to a level that kind of tries to realise some of these successes and opportunities. But yeah, I mean, the companies that Jenny and I have worked with on the UK Space Agency Cluster project, full of enthusiasm, very innovative, very forward-thinking, ambitious in their own right as well, willing to collaborate. Again, I think they realise that they can't do everything on their own, and I think in order to be that sustainable sector that it needs to be, I think it needs all parts of that system to come together, whether that be skills, governments or the companies themselves. But exciting times ahead, yeah.
It's always good to end on a positive note in the Scottish Affairs Committee, as you could sense, but I really do thank you all for coming down today and helping us out with this inquiry. And again, sorry for some of the inconvenience about the progress of business through the House today. But I think it's been a very useful session. I think there's a couple of things you might get back to us about, and if you could do that with our class, we'd be very grateful. And anything else that you feel that you could usefully contribute to this inquiry, we'd be more than happy to accept that. But for this afternoon, thank you for coming along. Order, order.